Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Cooper Nye, who is running as an independent for U.S. Congress for the 11th Congressional District. Welcome, Cooper.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul.
So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a born and raised Michigander. I grew up in Novi. I went to Walled Lake schools my entire life. Went to Michigan State like my parents did, and studied political philosophy there before moving out to D.C. So I went out there to intern for the Heritage Foundation in political thought, and ended up starting my career in communications at a libertarian public affairs firm, and then ultimately like a larger PR agency handling comms for Fortune 500 companies, federal agencies, and national nonprofits. So sort of working in the middle of the media and the connections of our political system.
Okay. So what made you move back to Michigan and decide to run for Congress?
Yeah, so it was actually one night I saw this documentary on Netflix, actually. And its analysis of where we are today and on the popularity of Trump and Bernie Sanders just really shook me, because this is a platform that reaches more people than our biggest TV broadcasters now. And in it, they're talking about this sort of desire to see real change to our system, this conviction that the system really doesn't serve citizens anymore. And from D.C., I was looking back at my home Michigan that went from Obama to Trump, and a lot of people in D.C. didn't understand that, but I really did. I saw a real desire for change, so I started talking to different people that I knew, and they encouraged me, so I quit my job there to come home and launch an independent campaign for Congress.
So what did you have to do to get on the ballot to be listed as an independent?
Right, yeah, so it's quite the process. Ballot access laws here in Michigan state that if you have no party, you need to collect at least 3,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And that's actually 3 times more than what either of the two parties need. So very early on from the get-go, I got to see how different laws, both state and federal, sort of work to stifle and crush real political competition. But I managed to collect more than 4,000, 3,000 myself, and the conversations I had with people from both sides were really invaluable and really affirmed my conviction that this is a big moment in our history.
Okay. Now, what do you say to people who say you would be throwing your vote away by voting for you?
Yeah, I got that one all the time, but I just fling it right back at them and say, well, what is your vote doing for you now? Sure, the Democrats want to flip this district blue, but you have to remember that you're sending them to Congress. You're going to have gridlock either way. So I sort of make the case that you're better off sending a message to the D.C. elites on both sides by electing an independent that we want to see a real difference.
Okay. I think it was George Washington who warned about the powers of political parties, and clearly both parties, I think his warning has come to fruition here.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And George Washington wasn't alone. Many of our founders, John Adams especially, just had this grave fear that the Republic might split into these fraying factions. And that's precise. Unfortunately for George Washington, right, like his administration were split into the two parties almost overnight. So there's that it's sort of funny.
Mm-hmm. Although, he never became part of any party.
Yeah.
And so I think from that standpoint, it was good for him. So what are a couple of the top issues you see facing America today?
Yeah, so the one that I had from the get-go, and which I found was actually top of mind for a lot of people, is just this polarization, this dysfunction, and the inability to get anything done. So for me, my go-to issue is accountability. Because we're at a time right now where 92% of Americans believe that the system serves big interests. And the sad thing is they're actually right. A public opinion polling survey over 20 years comparing what public opinion wanted and what Congress actually did found that the average American actually has a minuscule to zero impact on public policy. So to counter that, I'm looking to introduce an American Anti-Corruption Act to take big money out of politics, to end partisan gerrymandering, and block our members of Congress from dialing for dollars every day. Because I think with that, Americans will be able to elect people that really represent them. So that's my main issue, really.
Okay. What is your stance on abortion?
Yeah, so I am an independent, right? But I don't use that label to avoid taking hard stances or things that might be polarizing. But I'm somebody that's pro-life, with exceptions. But it's something that I've come to actually years. Like, I've not always been that way. I was pro-choice for a very long time in my life. But after just looking at the science and thinking about what we're actually doing there, I just came to the philosophic stance, a secular stance, that we should protect life.
Okay. What do you think should be done with Obamacare?
That's a big question. I don't like Obamacare. I want to see that repealed. Because when it comes to healthcare policies, or really any government policy, there's two ways you can go. You can inject new funding for something, or you can mess with the tax code, tax incentives. And a Republican proposal, actually, from 2009, I think makes a lot of sense. And the USA Today editorial board actually said this is a serious thing that demands consideration, but the conversation around that has totally died. And that's something that could attract bipartisan support with more moderate voices, I think, because that's going to bring down costs, it's going to increase access to care, and ultimately that's what both sides agree about.
Okay. What is your stance on corporate welfare and crony capitalism?
Oh my goodness, you asked me one of my favorite questions. One of my main things, in addition to accountability, is crony capitalism. And because, as you might know, every year in this country, we pay $100 billion to keep corporations on welfare. And that's not even talking about state or local taxes or different loopholes. Because when you add that in, the average American family making $75,000 a year is paying $6,000 in corporate welfare. So I would, something I really want to see happen is appoint a commission for the identification and elimination of subsidies. Because that's just, I'm somebody that believes in the free market, and these subsidies have a distortionary effect.
Okay. President Trump is talking and placing tariffs on various imports. What are your thoughts about his tariff policy?
Yeah, this is another great question. Because, again, I'm somebody who believes in free markets, and I don't think tariffs are the right way to do what's best for the American people. However, if it's used effectively as a negotiation tactic, if it's used as an effective threat, it gets it done. So I think when you're talking about Trump's tariff policies, you have to distinguish between a negotiating tactic and a real intention to implement it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm with you. I'm against tariffs, but if it's being used as negotiation, and the other side has to see it as a real threat, for them to come to the table to negotiate.
Otherwise they'll stay on the gravy train. And
right.
I mean, we've seen a couple successes already, right? The EU and China both coming to the table and deciding to bring things down on both sides. And I think President Trump has stated that his intended goal is no tariffs, no subsidies. So that's good to keep in mind, I think.
Okay. Unfortunately, every so often we have various shootings at schools and things like that, and it brings up the issue of gun control. What is your position on gun control?
Yeah, so I'm somebody who believes in upholding the rights in our Constitution. So I don't believe, although the problem is gun violence, I'm not certain that the answer includes guns at all. I think you have to look at the deeper causes of this violence. Because it's ultimately coming from kids who are from broken families or are disadvantaged in different ways, maybe on medications with different side effects. So I think that our society is failing these people in different places than our gun laws. So I would suggest increased counseling resources for schools, because that's what the people dealing with these children are saying they need. So I think that's where we should center the discussion, as opposed to banning guns or giving teachers guns. Like, I think there's a way to solve the problem at a different level.
Okay. So would you be opposed to any type of bans on guns, ammo clips, or ammunition?
Yeah, I'm opposed to all three, because in every case, I mean, I get it that people are upset. I mean, these shootings are heart-wrenching, but the fact of the matter is, in those three cases, banning that's not going to stop anything. Because, for example, the people that want to take away AR-15s, they typically see, and this has happened to me a ton of times talking to voters, they seem to assume that it's an automatic rifle or a fully semi-auto rifle, right? And so that's just not the case, because if you're going to ban that, why wouldn't you ban handguns, which are actually responsible for the majority of gun deaths? So again, that's an ineffective solution, as is magazine capacity, because something we should recall is that the Virginia Tech shooter, he did not have extended magazines. He just brought multiple. And if you're somebody that's operated a firearm, you understand that the amount of seconds you're talking about saving there is practically meaningless. So I think that's the way to look at this thing.
Okay. The United States is involved in numerous foreign wars, which has resulted in a large number of refugees. Mm-hmm. What do you think we should do with these refugees?
Yeah, so the refugees, I'm all for supporting these people, especially if we're somehow involved in their situation. However, there needs to be a process that doesn't endanger us and our own here at home. So long as there is a real and effective vetting process, I'm in favor of allowing those people to come here. However, I'm not certain that they even do. You know, these are people that want to escape violence, and so I think a lot of solutions that have been offered to provide that security and support in their own country or in nearby neighboring countries might actually be more favorable to them. So it really depends on the situation of the individual, I think.
Okay. And speaking of foreign wars, do you think the United States should be involved in all the foreign wars that they are now?
Oh, so no. I think I speak for most Americans when they say that they're sick and tired of these endless, pointless wars that are just a waste of money and American blood. However, that doesn't mean I'm against intervention in any case. I think a strong foreign policy and sort of judicious use of force is absolutely necessary in this world. However, I can't say that I support any of the outgoing conflicts that we have now.
Okay. Do you support building the wall?
The big question. Yes and no. I think that building the wall across the entire border is not only a waste, but probably ineffective. However, we do need increased border security, and I think there are ways we can think about. One being surveillance technology, because right now the Department of Defense from our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have these advanced surveillance drones and different systems that could be put on lease to the DHS. So I think that's one way to counter it. But border security is big for me. I think there is a real problem of immigration in this country, and it's going to take not only securing the border, but enacting meaningful immigration reform, which Congress has been kicking the can on for decades. So I do think that's something where there's a lot of ground for bipartisan reform. And another example of why I'm not certain the building a border wall would work is you also have the problem of corruption on the border. Because if somebody fighting to secure our country is not being properly rewarded for that, it leaves them vulnerable to capture to these different groups and traffickers. So say there's a wall, but there's still a door with somebody manning it. It's not an easy thing to stop, I don't think, but there's a lot we can do. Okay.
What should be done with the illegal immigrants that are here now?
So I don't believe in amnesty, because I think that sends the wrong message. Because if you're saying that there's no consequences for breaking our laws, then it's only going to invite further illegal border crossings. And to add to that, just the inherent injustice of that law breaking, because hundreds of millions of people go through the proper channels and are waiting in line. So if you're coming here illegally, you should have no expectation that you get to stay here, you get a free pass. However, I do also recognize right now that it's not always easy to do it the right way. So that's why, again, like my immigration stance includes increased border security, but also looking to how do we really get this system to work? You know, because maybe these people crossing illegally have been able to come over.
Okay. For those illegals who are here, do you think there should be a path to citizenship?
Yes, in certain cases, right? I mean, if there's somebody that has like a serious record of continual and serious like law breaking or violence, no, you shouldn't have that. But if you're somebody here who's, you know, really loves what the American way of life is about, and you're pitching in, you want to become a part of it, I say, you know, well, we should welcome them with open arms, because that's what this country is all about.
Okay. Do you consider Edward Snowden a hero or a traitor?
Wow, quite the binary. I don't know if hero is that's a little strong for me, but I think it was essential for the defense of civil liberties in this country that we know about what's going on. Because when you have intelligence directors lying before Congress about it, how are we ever going to know? Where is, you know, the sovereignty of voters in this question? So I'm, for one, glad that these things have come to light.
Okay.
I only say not a hero because I don't know a ton about him. I don't know his motivations, but the pure fact that we know about these great powers, I think, is nothing but good.
Okay. If he were to be returned to the United States, would you be in favor of any prosecution of him, criminal prosecution?
No, I wouldn't be.
Okay. So I heard your last response, so I think I know what your answer is going to be for this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Yeah.
Do you approve of the NSA spying on American citizens in secret?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because the little we know is astounding, the power that we've become aware of, and there's no reason to believe that that's it. So I don't know. I think as somebody who is totally liberty focused in everything that I do when it comes to solving problems or what drives me, I want to see those rights protected. And I think that type of concentration of power is near absolute. And it will only become even more of a threat as digital technologies continue to proliferate. And even just the chaos it created in the last election. I mean, we're at the very beginnings of something big in terms of a technological shift that I don't think we fully understand yet. So it's best to err on the side of caution.
Okay. Do you think freedom of speech is under attack in America, and especially on college campuses?
Yes, I do. I really do. Somebody that's came from a college campus, and I think that more and more Americans are recognizing this. There's a real desire to see diverse viewpoints, given the popularity of podcasts, like the Rubin Report or Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson. These are all people across the political spectrum that are saying, yes, there is a serious threat to not only free speech, but really the underpinnings of this country. Because without free speech, you won't have liberty. And so I think it's absolutely essential that we stand by that. And we shouldn't be afraid of viewpoints we think are ugly or nasty, because if they really are, we should be able to defeat that through reason and through arguments, not just this sort of emotional knee-jerk response that only empowers the things we dislike. So.
Okay. Twitter and Facebook have become such a large part of our daily lives, and it seems like they're moving towards a little bit of censorship on their platforms. should the federal government step in and regulate that, or because it's a private concern, just allow them to do their censorship as they see fit?
Yeah, so I honestly, I dislike censorship, and I think you are seeing it intentionally targeting conservatives. But no, I don't want the government stepping in, because that would sort of go against the things I've said here today. I think that if there is a real problem, then we should see more competition in this respect. Maybe coming up with different platforms or media channels to allow for that debate to happen. Because if it is really that severe and it continues to get worse, I think most Americans in this time of polarization will come to their senses and come to the middle and recognize that free speech really is probably one of the most important things that any of us has.
Okay. What is your opinion of football players taking a knee during the national anthem?
Yeah, so I respect there's free speech. I dislike it, but I think that's their right. However, if you look into the actual laws, again, this is sort of a similar question to the social media. Ultimately, the NFL is its own private entity, so if they have their policies, then ultimately those will prevail. But again, it's not something that's really, it's not something I care to wade into, because it's really something that, I don't know, I think you can be a patriot and still dissent. I wouldn't ascribe a lot of the nasty things that are said about them just because they're protesting. I think it can be an important way to show your love of country, and so long as we're still coming back and recognizing the sacrifices made by those that fight for it, I don't think we should. I don't think we have too much to worry about there.
Okay. But when they're kneeling, they're employees of the NFL. So would you think that the NFL would have the ultimate decision on whether they would allow it or not?
Yeah, I do, because again, that ties back. If I'm not willing for the government to get involved in social media, I also don't want it to invade that other private institution. I think it has to go both ways. Even if because the question here, with social media, it's a matter of censoring conservatives, and with the NFL, it's censoring so-called social justice. And I may stand one way or the other on both, but even if somebody disagrees with me, I want them to be able to express themselves.
Okay. The U.S. government is $20 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
And even much larger if you talk about unfunded liabilities.
Yep.
What, if anything, should be done with that?
Yeah, so I don't know whether it be an amendment or just an act, but we really need a balanced budget mechanism. Because we can't just keep kicking the can down the road on this. This is going to have serious repercussions for our economy and inflation rates, and interest rates, and it's hard to really get fired up about it because it's such an abstract and huge problem. But it's really one of the most important ones facing us. So in addition to that act to make sure that we're balancing things ahead of time, I would like to see some type of commission to go out for to really a comprehensive federal audit. I think is absolutely necessary, because we're talking about a $21 trillion debt here, something that didn't get any coverage, and I don't know why. There was a study from Michigan State. Do you know where I'm going with this?
No.
This is unbelievable. So these researchers at Michigan State looked at the federal budget in 2 departments for over a 15-year period, and they uncovered $21 trillion in unauthorized spending. And the researchers tried to follow it up. They requested documents, they made phone calls, and at every turn, documents were redacted, deleted, or they were hung up on or ignored. We have no answers on this still. And so I think that suggests just the size and scope and just the reckless sort of spending that we have. I mean, we really need an audit, and we really need to eliminate duplicative or wasteful projects, because a lot of times you have, one agency working on this while another is on the other side of the government. They have no idea. So it's really just about getting back to responsibility and recognizing that this affects future generations. we really need to stop being so selfish.
Okay. Having a libertarian streak in you,
Yeah.
I think a lot of libertarians are strongly in favor of ending the Federal Reserve. What's your opinion on that?
I'm undecided on that ultimately, but I'm very sympathetic. I think it's a fascinating point, because something similar that I am in favor of is repealing the federal income tax, because I just see that as unconstitutional and ultimately just setting the wrong incentives for the citizenry. Because what I would like to see instead is a national sales tax, because that would make up for lost revenue and you're also taxing consumption instead of income. So that would encourage savings at a time of skyrocketing debt, and it would potentially be a boon to the environment in terms of like reducing those type of expenditures. So again, undecided on the Federal Reserve. I'm open to learning more. If you know any libertarians that are really into it, I'd love to hear it. But yeah, pretty anti-tax though.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your view on the war on poverty?
I think it was an utter failure, because that was instituted in the 1960s, and poverty rate has remained relatively flat despite increasing funding for it. And not only is it ineffective, but it's actually sort of perverse in some ways, because the incentives in these policies actually encourage divorce. It doesn't incentivize families, and without families, it's really hard for strong communities to really grow and flourish. So despite the noble intention of trying to alleviate poverty, it's really only triggered dependence and not really liberating people in the way that everybody longs to be free. So I'm somebody who's in favor of government safety nets, but the one we have right now is just, it's broken.
Okay. What, if anything, would you do to replace the war on poverty?
That's a really good question. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head in terms of how much we are spending, but I think that you would probably be better off just scrapping all of it and cutting dividends to citizens based on like a real review of their needs and making sure that those dollars are going to people in need and that it's being used as a stepping stone to independence. So that would, on the one hand, be better for people. It would reduce the size and scope of government, and it would lessen the tax burden on taxpayers at the same time.
Okay. Well, I wish you much success in your campaign.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paul.
Thank you, Cooper.
Yeah.